For NYUpInSyracuse.com, this is Matt Parrino, joined as always by Ryan Talbot, and we are heading into week 2 of OTAs down at One Bills Drive in Orchard Park. And it was an exciting first week. We got our first look at Ed Oliver and Cody Ford. Tons of roster fodder to discuss here as we move through this offseason process, and we kind of look ahead to training camp. And what we wanted to do real quick is we put out some position battles to watch last week ahead of the first practice open to the media, and we wanted to expand upon that a little bit, dive into maybe 3 position battles that we'll be paying extra close attention to this week. And we wanted to start off with wide receiver. You figure that you got the top 4 pretty much set in stone, right? Zay Jones, Robert Foster, John Brown, and Cole Beasley, guys that, you're pretty much penciling in unless something crazy happens as, making this roster. But after that, there's some real interesting pieces here as you go down the depth chart and or the roster. Sean McDermott says there are no depth charts this time of year, and you have Isaiah McKenzie, who played a little bit last year for the Bills. You have David Sills, undrafted free agent, who made a lot of headlines when the Bills signed him. And then you got a whole host of players. Andre Roberts with some special teams experience. Obviously, he was brought in to contribute in the kick and the punt return. Ryan, let's start there. I mean, who jumps off the page at you as somebody to really watch in this position battle?
Yeah, Duke Williams is going to be the wide receiver that I'm going to say to keep an eye on. And I know he was signed before free agency when they brought in John Brown and they brought in Beasley and they brought in Roberts, all 3 who I pretty much have in pen in terms of being guys that are going to be on this 53-man roster. Roberts, the latter, being for his special teams ability. But you have Duke Williams, and every year the Bills have had this bigger target, these guys that can be those red zone weapons, so to speak. And I think that's what they're hoping to have in Duke Williams. You bring him in from the CFL. He was the leading receiver in the league last year. Here's a guy that you did a piece on where he's pretty motivated to make the most of his second opportunity here in the NFL, to make sure that he doesn't fizzle out, that he proves that he's going to be here and going to be in this league to stay. So I'm really intrigued to see what he does, because there's only so many spots on this wide receiving core, so to speak, that they're going to carry, whether it's 6 or 7 wide receivers. I can't envision them carrying more than that. So if you take those top 4, you throw Roberts in, there's 5 right there. All of a sudden you're looking at guys like you said, there's Duke Williams, there's Sills, there's Isaiah McKenzie, there's Nick Easley, there's Cam Phillips, who at times flashed last year. So it's the bottom of that roster in terms of the wide receiver room to see who's going to really stand out and prove their worth this summer.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting. In OTAs last week, getting our first look at Andre Roberts, they had him running quite a bit out, on the outside as a wide receiver 1 or 2, depending, mixed in there with different teams. So I think it's going to be interesting. This regime loves position flexibility. We've talked about it a lot, over the course of the offseason. And, it gets me thinking about Andre Roberts, and obviously he brings some real a real upgrade to the special teams unit, but maybe they want to flash him out there and see if in a pinch they can use him in certain scenarios, if he has some upside as a receiver. I think the next 4 months, I'm really going to be keeping my eye on Ray McCloud. I know he's an afterthought for most Bills fans after he really struggled as a rookie, late round pick, and didn't really flash too much during the season, but he's still only 22 years old. I think that, if any type of player was going to get motivated by some disappointments in a season, it's going to be last season for Ray McCloud. He's been kind of a little bit quiet on social media for the most part, but I have seen a few sparse posts about getting refocused and remotivated, and seeing what different guys around him, like an undrafted Robert Foster, who just figured it out and everything kind of happened for him. And I think he has an advantage over a lot of the guys in here because he's been with Brian Daboll since the beginning of offseason last year when he came in as a rookie. And a lot of these guys talk about the difference of going through an offseason as a second-year player as opposed to when you're a rookie and you have to go through the draft process and the scouting, and it's all about showing off so you can get a job, so that you can contribute. Now he's going in. He knows he's here. He knows he's going to be here, and he's able to work on his game and work on his craft and study the different minds that are available in this coaching staff. So I'm very interested to see what Ray McLeod can do with that opportunity. And don't forget about Cam Phillips as well. I mean, I've spoken to him a few times this offseason, hopefully for a bigger piece later this summer. And he's a guy that was, at one time when he was at Virginia Tech, a projected first, second, third round pick somewhere in there before the injury. They told him at the end of last season they really liked him and think that he can help them in the future. So another guy to keep an eye on, but we want to keep this moving along. The second one, Ryan brought it up before we started this podcast, and it's the guard position. Why don't you break that down for us, Ryan?
Yeah, the Bills made a lot of moves along their entire offensive line this summer. But during free agency, they've signed a few different players that can play guard. Spencer Long, actually before free agency because he had been released, and then Quentin Spain. And it's kind of interesting because both players, you kind of penciled them in. You said, okay, Spain's going to be a guy that's going to compete at left guard for the starting position because his career with the Titans, it was at left guard. And Spencer Long had a lot of his career between center and at right guard. So, of course, in OTAs week one, what do you see? Well, the Bills flip those two guys around all together, and you have Long at left guard, and you have Spain at right guard. And obviously, you can't forget about a guy like Wyatt Teller, who had 7 starts as a rookie and did have some flashes of very strong play at times, but he also had his rookie moments as well. So, there's going to be someone's going to lose the tackle competition. I'll throw all 3 names in there between Dawkins, Ty Nsekhe, and Cody Ford. Could one of them be thrown into the guard competition as well because they want their best 5 players? So guard position to me is really intriguing. One, because we're already seeing them kind of flip these 2 players around that you kind of already you had an idea of, okay, they've played most of their career at this spot. This is where they're going to be penciled in, and all of a sudden, week one, they're in a completely different guard area. So I think it'll go kind of with what you were mentioning at wide receiver, a little position flexibility. Can you handle playing both guard spots? Can you handle, even maybe for a guy like John Feliciano, another guard, playing center, something that he had to do because of some injuries and things like that so far in OTA. So position flexibility is going to play a big role. Can you play both guard spots? What can you do for this team? Because there's a lot of talent on this roster at guard.
I think that the situation with Deion Dawkins is what's going to really, shape this thing once we get into training camp and, going forward. You mentioned John Feliciano, a guy that was probably in the mix for both guard jobs in terms of the competition. He lined up at center with the first team in subbing in for Mitch Morse, who wasn't there. So when Mitch Morse gets back, it's going to be interesting to see if things shift at all on the offensive line. If Spain goes back to the left side, where does Wyatt Teller come in here? Because, it's interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong. You had Wyatt Teller not making the team in your 53-man projection, correct?
That's correct. He was player number 54. I opted for Feliciano because of his experience playing under Bobby Johnson, his versatility, and then I kept another tackle in Adrian Waddle, a guy, again, who's played under Bobby Johnson. That tackle position, you want to have that depth there, a guy that you can trust to bring in. So, yeah, he was player number 54. He was the last person that I cut when I kind of projected the roster. It was a tough decision. But, yeah, that was the decision nonetheless at this point in the offseason.
Yeah, well, I was glad that you did make that make that call because it got me thinking. Because when I first saw it, I was like, the first thought in my head, I was like, no way will they move on from Wyatt Teller, 5th-round pick after 1 year. But the more you start to think about it and the more you take a look at this roster, he's going to be in for a battle. And he's somebody that we're going to talk about, throughout training camp as a guy that started all those games last year, had his moments like you mentioned, and now is up against 3-ish guys that have some significant NFL experience. I mean, 48 starts for Quentin Spain. I mean, that's a guy that you could plug in day one, likely on either side, and have a real contribution. You go back to some of the plays that, where he struggled last year, and it was just, he was a little bit slow. progressing through, his reads from that offensive line spot. When he read the play properly and found his assignment and delivered, he was lights out. He was great. But there was also those moments where, he would look to, make a quick block and forget about, what his next, or was slow in evaluating his next assignment. And when you're just a half a second too slow in this league, that's something that these guys have had years and years and years of not only on-field experience, but tape and being able to look at what they've done on film and make corrections. And that's going to be something that, for a guy that like Wyatt Teller, I mean, personally, I think he's a great story, a great interview. So it'll be interesting to see, if he's able to stay on the team. But I wanted to mention that because I think that was a very forward-thinking decision to go with that, because this could be a very important few months for Wyatt Teller.
Oh, without a doubt. And he's not the only draft pick under this regime that's, playing with a lot of pressure. You already mentioned Ray McLeod. There's Saran Neal. So there's three guys right there. Mind you, they were all day 3 picks. They were all, later picks in that draft. But all three are going to be fighting for their lives this year for roster battles. The Bills aren't just going to keep you on this roster because you are a Brandon Beane or a Sean McDermott pick. You're going to have to earn it. They've added a lot of talent across the board, especially at offensive line. So while I think Teller has the best shot of those three players I mentioned, it's not going to be handed to him. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this summer.
Mm-hmm. And I will throw out there on Saran Neal, he was playing quite a bit of nickel corner at OTAs the other day at practice, and that's something that I think that's going to be sneaky a battle between Raphael Bush, who they really like, and Saran Neal. Can Saran Neal show enough if it comes down to it when they're trying to cut down this roster between those two? Are they confident enough in Saran Neal to make him the guy in that spot, a guy that can be your reserve safety, but also come in and play your big nickel? I think it's going to be very interesting to see, because I know that they're probably going to want to keep Jaquan Johnson around at least for a season, because they spent a draft pick on him, and it seems like they like him a lot as well.
Yeah, safety is another spot where the Bills have two guys that are Pro Bowl type starters, but you want to have that depth behind them, because you never know what's going to happen in this league in terms of injuries. And for Neal to stick, he's really going to have to improve, in my opinion, significantly from his rookie year, because he was a guy that they didn't really want to get on the field in terms of on defense, at least. He played a lot of special team snaps, but even a guy like Dean Marlowe came in and played more defensive snaps than Saran Neal last year. Obviously, Bush played over 450 snaps, so it's going to be a tall task for him to prove himself and to kind of gain that trust from this coaching staff.
Mm-hmm. We'll wrap it up here with cornerback, because I think that again is going to be one of those real fiery competitions. You have Levi Wallace, undrafted free agent out of Alabama, that came in and really flashed last year, and Pro Football Focus has him as one of the top young players in this league. There's a lot of articles that you read out there on the internet that Levi Wallace this and Levi Wallace that, and I think it's a lot of expectations now are on a second-year undrafted guy who, like we've talked about, really played well last year when he got the call and he got some time. But they brought in some real experienced veterans in Kevin Johnson, former first-round pick. He was in Houston for 4 years, and E.J. Gaines, who had a lot of success here 2 years ago before a year in Cleveland. Kevin Johnson looked really good in practice last week. He's a guy that pretty fiery guy, competitive guy, was talking a little bit. So I think that, these guys are going to be gunning for playing time, and it's going to be interesting to see how Levi Wallace handles the competition.
Yeah, Wallace is a little bit of an analytics darling based on his 7 starts. We had previously, in a previous conversation, talked about how Josh Allen wasn't an analytics favorite, but Levi Wallace has been. And like you mentioned, Pro Football Focus mentioned him as one of the top cornerbacks. He was the highest rated rookie last year among all cornerbacks, and he's also someone that they're projecting will be one of the top players under 25 in next season's article that they'll publish. So there's a lot of noise there behind Levi Wallace. But as you mentioned, E.J. Gaines, here's a guy who, when he was on the field with the Bills in 2017, that defense was at its best. They were holding opposing offenses to very low totals, and He played a major factor in that because it was hard to throw to either side of the field when he was healthy. Obviously, health is going to be the biggest factor in terms of how much of an impact he makes this year. Kevin Johnson, as you mentioned, a guy that has that versatility, in my opinion, that could play inside or outside. And he's a guy that has experience playing under John Butler, their new secondary coach. So he has that working for him. He might know some of the terminology that Butler is going to be giving to the defensive backs in OTAs, in training camp, in the preseason, and that could kind of help him out significantly. So Wallace faces some tough competition. I think that one of those cornerbacks could also end up competing for the slot or the nickel cornerback job that Taron Johnson had last year. He played again very well, another rookie, but he dealt with shoulder injuries throughout the entire rookie season. Almost every game it felt like he had some kind of minor damage to the shoulder where he was out for a few plays. He'd go back in. Other cases where he was ruled out for the rest of the game. So, there's a lot of talent, but there's also some question marks there in terms of injuries, in terms of what are you going to get out of these players. So I'm really interested to see what the cornerbacks do this summer.
We're going to bring it all to you guys. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Follow us on Facebook, Buffalo Bills on NY Up. We're on Instagram, Twitter, at Bills Updates. You can find Ryan on Twitter, at Ryan Talbot Bills. I'm at Matt Parrino. And, for all your Buffalo Bills content, as always, keep it locked on to nyupsyracuse.com.